So, haere mai, tala palava, malo elele, and welcome to the summing up session of our first book group that we have been running as part of Connected Educator Month, New Zealand Aotearoa. My name is Karen Malush Spencer, and working with COOL, I'm the lucky person who's been driving Connected Educator along, and I'm delighted to be joined again this afternoon by Sally, who is, I'm going to point the wrong way, sitting over to my right. Sally, if you want to just say a quick kia ora and just into the mic. Oh, make sure that your mic is on.
Kia ora, yeah, I just turned it off. Hello, everybody.
That's great. And diagonally, oh God, spatial awareness, diagonally down, oh no, there we go, underneath. If you want to say kia ora this afternoon, Rachel.
Kia ora, everyone.
And it's wonderful that you could be here this afternoon. We have apologies from Sue McDowell and Rose Hipkins, who are both unable to join us today, but I know that they wanted to be here. They're with us in spirit, and Sally and Rachel are representing for those other two authors of the Key Competencies for the Future book, which is what we have been exploring over the last 2 or 3 weeks. We also will have with us this afternoon, technology willing, Danielle Myberg from Hobsonville Point Secondary School and Reid Walker from Henderson North School in Auckland. And I know that Reid is here and he's just getting himself set up. So it's great that you could come back here and join us, Reid, and I know Danielle is just sorting out technology. And I will just mention one thing, Reid, that due to the other, the earlier issue with the eavesdropping, your mic may be permanently muted, which means, Reid, you might have to come out of the room and come back in again, which is possibly a slight issue. But if you need to do that, Reid, go for it. Okay, right. So in this afternoon session, which is just a short, oh, I can just hear, Danielle, is that you, someone talking there?
It's me, yes, I'm here.
Kia ora, do you want to say a quick hello to the camera?
Hi everybody, I'm just on the phone, thanks to my technical support.
Oh,
Hey, Danielle.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful, Danielle. If you want to just gently touch your mic and mute it, then we'll be able to carry on. And it looks like that when it's muted. Okay. So before we get further in, we will just settle ourselves with a brief karakia for this afternoon. Kia hora te marino, kia whakapapa po namu te moana. Hei horahi matato I te rangi nei. Aroha atu, aroha mai, tato I tato katoa, huye takie. So welcome one and all, and I can see, I don't know whether you want to turn your camera on, and just to say kia ora this afternoon as well. But just while you're sorting that out, Reid, just a little bit of housekeeping for this afternoon. We'll keep our mics to mute unless we're speaking. We can raise our hands if we have a question by using the little button with the person with their hand up. We are recording this session, as we have done with all the Connected Educator sessions, and archiving them on the Connected Educator site. And I have the support of a team in here. We've got Simon Crozier, who is providing technical support, Ray Birkhill, who's providing facilitation support as well. For all presenters and participants, we have open digital badges as part of Connected Educator Month, and there'll be a link to an evaluation form at the end of the session. And also a thank you to Microsoft, who've been one of our supporting sponsors this year, and they have been supporting this particular book group to make sure that it happens, and it has happened, so thank you to them as well. But really the main thanks and loud applause needs to go to NZCER and this particular team who are with us today, Rose and Rachel, Sally and Sue, the authors of Key Competencies for the Future, an absolute must read, I would say, particularly thinking about the kinds of conversations that are beginning to happen, not just in New Zealand Aotearoa, but globally, in terms of what future-focused learning looks like, what it could look like. And the reason why this book, I think, is particularly important and why people are getting so excited about it is because it offers up a really practical and specific starting point for educators in New Zealand schools who are working with the New Zealand curriculum, and it highlights that the key competencies could be the starting point, the vehicle for beginning to imagine and shape what 21st century or future-focused education might look like. And over the last 2 or 3 weeks, we kicked off in a webinar around this book, and we had an overview of 2 or 3 key ideas which then have been explored and unpacked in a discussion thread in the Virtual Learning Network, and I'll go and grab that link in a minute and pop it in the chat, because that discussion thread doesn't stop today because it's in an online forum. It has a persistence, and people are very welcome to go back into the VLN and continue these discussions after today. And I'll say kia ora if you just joined us. It's wonderful to have you here this afternoon. We're just kicking into to the meat of the session right now. So the way the next half an hour is going to go, and this is just a brief pulling together session to bookend the book group this month. We're going to revisit with Sally and Rachel to start with some of the meaty questions that have been surfacing in the Virtual Learning Network over the last 2 or 3 weeks. And then we'll be handing over to Reid and to Danielle, who have generously decided that they had a bit of time this afternoon to join us and to share their stories. And these are 2 educators who have been beginning to explore some of the ideas in the book and actually put them into practice. So they are at the bleeding edge of the thinking here, and it's wonderful that they could be with us this afternoon. So Danielle and Reid, I'll be coming over to you in a moment. But first of all, I would like to kick off with Sally and Rachel this afternoon. Now, one of the key ideas that was being explored in the book, and it's really the framework, isn't it, for the book. Hi, Reid, just saying hello. Actually, just before I get into this, Reid, do you want to say kia ora to the room and also to check that your mic is working?
Hello, everybody. Kia ora.
Wonderful, that's great. So we've got everyone in place now, she says with confidence. That's wonderful. Brilliant. Okay, so mics to mute apart from perhaps Rachel and Sally, and we'll get into a couple of the meaty questions that have been being explored. So this framework around wicked problems, which you took as a kind of provocation, I think, for a way of getting into how the key competencies could be a vehicle. This was, it might be actually worthwhile, because I know that some people watching this won't have read the whole book. Perhaps if I can start with you, Rachel, just to give us a summary again of what the notion is. What are these wicked problems that really drive the book?
Yeah, so as I said in the first webinar, we really approached wicked problems as a framing idea that could help us in our own kind of thinking and for our readers to kind of make the connection between some of those big questions around what's the purposes of learning, how do we think that the learning that we do in schools now connects to the kinds of opportunities in which people will need to bring their learning to bear in the future. And yeah, so I guess that's how we thought about it. We thought about it as a sort of a framing and a process, but really it was about helping ourselves and helping educators start to kind of see that line of sight a bit more clearly, and thinking about how the context that we provide for key competency development can both we and our students can actually see how those opportunities connect with kind of bigger, longer term and more community-wide challenges.
That's great. So it's really an authentic space for learning. I mean, would you agree, Sally? It's about, you know, by tackling,
Yes.
I'll just go back to that previous slide. It's really framing up something real for students to get their teeth into. Is that right?
Yes, well, we were really concerned about thinking about where the world is going in the future and the sorts of competencies and capabilities young people will need to have to address wicked problems. So it was in some ways an ideal framing for us to start. at this is what we need to be doing, and then work backwards and think, well, what are the sorts of learning experiences that young people need in order for them to be able to work towards working together to find solutions to some of these problems.
So this concept around wicked problems, and the slide that you can all see in front of you now, you guys shared this slide in the again as a wee reminder, particularly because I know Danielle and Reid will be returning to this idea with their own stories a little bit later on. But what's really interesting is, in terms of the definitions, that they're highly complex and they're uncertain, and they cut right across different kind of social domains. And there's a list there around climate change and food security and persistent inequality and so on. Pretty meaty, pretty challenging starting points for learners. And there were some questions. It's really captured the imagination of a group of teachers who are either putting things into practice and sharing their ideas in the VLN. And the kind of questions that have been coming up are in this slide in front of us now. And they're worth working through and hearing from you, Sally and Rachel. If you were going to frame up learning around these wicked problems that are real and out there in society, how do teachers start? I mean, does the teacher just decide who instigates the problem that's going to be a focus? And once you've chosen with the students, how does that then dictate or lead to the kind of pedagogy that we're looking for future focused learning? Just a short question there to kick off. I don't know who wants to jump in first. Rachel?
Anne Sturgis talked about work that she'd done with Year 10 students where they were looking at the theme of local participation and global confidence. And the students there were choosing the focus of their own learning, designing how they would weave in the different strands and learning objectives, and also how they would show evidence that learning had occurred, as opposed to just showing the products of their learning. Some of the other teachers that contributed talked about some of the emotional dimensions that come into play in the classroom when you're getting into wicked problems, and that it's when you're dealing with kind of complex questions or finding questions that don't have ready-made answers. It's not just a cognitive or an academic exercise. So I thought that was interesting. A number of people talked about that. And then Camilla talked about a project they'd been doing with their junior students that was around thinking about public spaces, and all of that was triggered from a 5-year-old coming in and making a comment that the playground was boring. So all of these examples, I think, are really good illustrations of the way that we can have the notion of wicked problems in mind, but we don't always have to start with the biggest, most kind of complex issues. We can actually work with students to kind of find the questions that are like the threads of a jumper, and you start pulling them and pulling them and pulling them and pulling them, and you see what's at the end. And I kind of think about wicked problems in that way. There isn't one place to start, and actually starting where you are and with the students in front of you, I think, is probably the best way, and then having that line of sight to see how the microcosm connects up to the sort of bigger challenges.
I really like the way, thank you, I really like the way that you've given an overview of the really neat examples that are in the VLN. I've put a link there to the discussion because there's lots of examples and stories and reflections that people have started to share. And I like the way that you say that actually, you know, it can be triggered by something that the students bring in, and their own wanderings and prior knowledge and so on. And Sally, I wonder if I can just ask you for a comment about the second part of that question. You know, it's one thing for students to begin to bring in an idea or for a question to prompt an exploration. It's quite another to then wrap a learning experience around that. I mean, it invites a certain pedagogical approach from the teacher, doesn't it?
Yes, I guess it harks back to the teacher as the facilitator rather than the person up the front of the classroom. And I always think about some of the work that James Bean has done in that space, you know, when students bring their own learnings to the classroom, and then the teacher, their role, I guess, is to connect those up with the bigger picture ideas. But I guess that is, it does pose those challenges, doesn't it, in terms of having a more open-ended planning process and co-constructing, working with your students together, which sort of gets into that, you know, how do teachers manage the risk and messiness of it. I can see that can be very challenging for people in the classroom. Sometimes it's about sort of, I guess, taking that approach where you don't always know where the end point is going to be, and you're on that journey together, but you've got your sort of plans along the way as well. So it's that balancing act, I guess.
Unmute my microphone. Yes, and I think, I mean, if we look at the section in the New Zealand curriculum which talks about, you know, approaches that we know work for learners, then that's everything that you just listed there. And so, so where do the key competencies fit into that?
Actually, I was just thinking a bit about that in terms of that last question about managing the challenges around assessment, and in some ways, you know, there's the content and the competencies, but can I actually sort of, when we get onto that question, could I talk about that there, because it sort of answers it a bit? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. And actually that was something that started to come up in a conversation with Rose in the VLN as well, so we'll come back to that in a second.
Yeah.
So maybe just one more thought then around these wicked problems. And I've actually seen this question come up quite often in communities like English Online, where books raise themes around you know, social issues which could be described as quite negative and dismal and concerning. I mean, what's your view on that? I mean, you know, wicked problems, they do seem to be pretty negative. I mean, how do you, you know, what are your thoughts around that? Have they got to be negative by definition? Is there a way to strike a balance around that?
For me, it's about how you position students' role, and I guess for me that's why I'm really interested in that that students are active citizens now. They're not citizens in waiting who are sitting around sort of looking at the problems that the world has. They're taking an active role in addressing those problems, and by taking an active role in addressing something that's small in your own environment, gives people a sense of agency and hope. And so that's one way of I guess staying positive in the face of negativity, is actually being able to do something in your own environment that yeah, makes you feel good and makes you feel that you could address wider and larger problems as well.
Would you agree with that, Rachel? Thank you for that, Sally. I mean, does that
Actually
sound,
actively
you know,
are
a positive,
experiencing what it is
invitational
to
approach to
find a
taking
good
control of the
problem,
future?
explore the many different perspectives on what the problem actually is, because I think, you know, that's the root of wicked problems, is that there isn't one single perspective even on what the problem is, let alone.
Mm. Mm.
That's a really It's really nice. We often sometimes forget about those definitions that sit there right at the front as we speed our way through to the learning areas further about. But you know, this idea of equipping young people for a life beyond school, life during school as well as beyond school, for citizens now, citizens in the future. And you bring in then this idea that, you know, the key competencies being woven through the approach that you take into these problems. And this was one of the other questions, and we'll just unpack this idea just for a little bit before we come over to our first story of the afternoon. But this is something that came up in the discussion thread, and it is it's a pretty challenging question to get our heads around. But you know, if we're going to use those capabilities or to provide space to grow those capabilities as we explore these wicked problems, in terms of what comes out at the other end, in terms of how do we know that we're making a difference, there is this pesky question around assessment. So I'm going to come back over to you, Sally, to kind of field this one. You know, what is your thinking around this? Advice for educators who are teaching in this much more open way?
Yes, the assessment question is always a biggie, isn't it? And it's a very complex question, and I saw that Rose and Paul from Mercury Bay were having some interesting discussions around that on the BLN. It's interesting actually because our journey with the key competencies in some ways started in 2005, I think it was, where the Ministry commissioned us to write a paper about assessing the key competencies and what forms of assessment could look like. And one thing that we found really helpful, which is on the slide here, is thinking about, well, why would you assess the key competencies? And this is 3 purposes of assessment from Aikenhead. And he talks about how there's 3 reasons why you might assess things. One is for systems accountability, which is that sort of summative assessment. The next one is supporting students' learning. But the third is empowering students to be lifelong learners. And I think for the key competencies, the third purpose is in some ways the really important one. And if we have that purpose in mind, and then that helps frame us think about, well, what forms of assessment fit more with empowering students to be lifelong learners. Because when we use the term assessment, we often immediately sort of leap to thinking about summative assessment and charts and graphs and all those sorts of things, when in fact the sorts of processes that we might use to empower students to be lifelong learners are different. They're more about active and student involvement in assessment, about students setting goals, self and peer assessment, and talking about the competencies they developed in their 3-way conferences with parents. So I think if we keep that purpose in mind, then that helps us answer that question. And in terms of I guess planning, there was some talk on the VLN about backward mapping. I guess for me, I think one of the things that's really important is we want to have the key competencies visible. And one of the way that the OECD originally framed the competencies is they had thinking as being a cross-cutting competency, and reflective thinking was at the heart of all the competencies. And in order for students to be able to reflectively think about the competencies, I guess they need to be having discussions with them, setting goals about them, thinking about, what competencies am I going to be developing as I'm doing this task. So to me, they sort of sit alongside everything you do. When you're planning, you're thinking about, well, what competencies would students be developing? And students can be brainstorming about, if we're going to be doing these things, what capabilities am I trying to develop? And then when you finish something, reflecting on it and thinking, well, what were the capabilities we actually did develop? What do we want to do next? So to me, that idea about empowering people to be lifelong learners is about using assessment practices that actually promote the key competencies at the same time.
So just, I mean, as you say, it's kind of complex, but there's something holistic about the approach that I think really appeals and gives permission for educators to work beyond that summative closed assessment, and to actually draw the students. So to bring the assessment into the learning, so to draw the students into conversations around their own progress as a central part of the learning there. What I would like to do, and I will come back to you in a moment, Rachel and Sally, but I'm also kind of keeping a wee eye on the time, and I'm just going to move through a couple of other slides, but I would like to come back to these ideas. These were 2 other key themes that have been explored. This value of working through diversity and thinking about diversity is another key idea that we've started to touch on in the VLN. And also the idea of students being citizens now, that you can take action now to impact the world around you, rather than preparing students for a time when they're somehow older and capable enough. This idea that you can make a difference immediately. And what I would like to do is invite Reid and Danielle to share their stories, because I know that it's one thing to read a book and to explore the ideas and think about it for yourself. It's quite another to then actually, with all the complications of school, to begin to put it into practice. And so I'm delighted that Reid and Danielle have joined us this afternoon. They can really only give us a wee snapshot today of where their thinking is, and I know that they would both say that they're not going to put up some kind of perfect example, but they're on a journey, and their willingness to share their thinking in whatever form it's in today, I think, is a real mark of what we're looking for with a modern educator. So without further ado, we'll start with yourself, Reid, and I might ask Sally and Rachel if you want to maybe pop your cameras off for the moment while we hear from Reid and Danielle. So Reid, who is at Reid Teach NZ on Twitter, he's based at Henderson North School, teaching year 5 and 6, and you can see he's also part of Kids EdChat NZ, and he also blogs his own thinking and reflection, which I think is how you got drawn into this in the first place, Reid, is because you've actually been sharing your thinking publicly. So what I'm going to ask you to do is make sure your microphone is on, and just really for the next few minutes, Reid, just really tell us a bit about what you've been doing. Keep your camera on, Reid, if you can. If not, we'll just go with the sound. So Reid, can you say hi and make sure that we can still hear you? Did we just lose him at the exact moment he was about to speak? Which happens. Have we lost him out of the room? We've lost him out of the room. The computer could feel the pressure. Okay, so what I'm going to do while Reid gets himself back into the room is that I am going to move swiftly to our other fabulous guest this afternoon, to Danielle Myberg, who is Misty the teacher on Twitter, and who is also super famous in New Zealand and beyond for being the person who kickstarted EdChat to NZ, and she also blogs at missteacher.blogspot. But it's her work at Hobsonville Point Secondary School that we're most interested in this afternoon. So Danielle, tell us a little bit about what you've been trying with your Year 9 students and how it really picks up on some of the ideas in that the NZCER have been exploring.
So last term had the great fortune of getting to teach with Steve Mouldy in one of our cross-curricular modules here at Hobsonville Point. So Steve being a social science teacher and me being a science teacher, wicked problems seemed like a really, I mean, Steve ran into the office one morning, as he does most mornings. He's like, I read this thing last night, and handed me the book and said, this is what we need to do. And I read it, and it wasn't even a question of, oh, it was just, yes, let's do it. So we started our module with just getting the kids to brainstorm what's wrong with the world. That was the only prompt they were given, is what is wrong with the world. And you'll see on the slides right there are some of the things they came up with, and we got them to start linking some ideas. And then eventually we introduced them to 5 of the wicked problems that was actually given as examples in the Key Competencies book, or Key Competencies for the Future book. And we specifically focused on food security, biodiversity loss, environmental degradation, climate change, and fossil fuels depletion. And from there, we gave students a choice. They could choose one. So that idea of manageability, and for a teacher, how do you cope with such a big problem? Like, it's to scaffold students through it. We decided that we've got to still personalize and give them choice, but there has to be an aspect of students. It has to be manageable for us as teachers dealing with this massive issue for the first time, and this idea of a wicked problem for the first time. So from there, we had students start unpacking it, but because it was a cross-curricular module, it worked incredibly well, because from a social sciences perspective, we could unpack. So the kids looked at things like, what would be an eco-justice perspective on this wicked problem, or what would be a nationalist perspective or a liberalist perspective. And Steve was really amazing at supporting students through unpacking what those perspectives might look like. So it ties in really well to this idea of a wicked problem, because these people with different perspectives, but this allows the students to understand, well, actually, having a different perspective it's a normal thing, it's the way the world works, but what do we do about it? I mean, so me as a science teacher, I brought that scientific perspective, and it actually ties in really well with the nature of science aspect of the curriculum as well, so not just key competencies, and that students were then asked to, once they've sorted out the problem, like, what is the problem? Is it really a problem? What makes it a problem? What's the evidence? They were then asked to actually come up with a solution. No pressure at all. And but what was really powerful about it is, as the kids went through this, we introduced some ideas for them as well. So you'll see in the slides there, at the top there is a scientist. He's PhD. He's a doctor now. So Dr. Javed Khan from the University of Auckland, who is specifically looked at aquaculture and marine reserves. So introduced the students to the idea of aquaculture and marine reserve, and how those ideas deals with food security and biodiversity loss. So we scaffold the students through the whole process of, actually, there is a problem, this is the problem, understanding the problem, and we used a lot of really, really great techniques that from some of the staff here at Hobsonville Point, and there's some of them on mine and Steve's blog, so things like question grids, things like an old school SWOT analysis. Never ever underestimate the power of a SWOT analysis. Venn diagrams, so just those basic things that we all use, but just applied to this idea of a wicked problem. And then finally, students had the chance to then brainstorm a lot of ideas. There's, as we call it, the fuzzy front end. That's when all the ideas go in. There's no judgment. The good ones, the bad ones, the ugly ones, they all get written down, and then you start refining. And so we took students through that with finishing the module at the end of the term with, okay, so you've got an hour, save the world in an hour. And you'll see that this is some of the things that have come out of it. One of our students wrote to, a number of our students wrote to some ministers. We've got one with a response. One group of students are planning an earth walk. In particular, what was really powerful because of those different perspectives and making sense of it, you'll see I've put some quotes from another student letter there who actually identified that the ACT MP that got elected in Epsom in Auckland, he identified one of their policies around fossil fuel and kind of felt uncomfortable with what it was. So he wrote to them to actually unpack some of the evidence with them and try and understand where their perspective has come from. So for us, this whole journey of exploring a wicked problem has actually turned out into something really positive, where students not only understand the issue, and we arranged the chance for them to talk to scientists and talk to a whole range of people, but we gave them the opportunity to do something about it and realize that it's not the problem that's the issue, it's the fact that nobody's really stepping up and doing something about it. And Steve summed it up so nicely. His key message is that it all goes back to stop preparing students for the future and start helping them build the future that we want or that they want. And that's it from me. Any questions?
I think you put that incredibly powerfully, Danielle, and you've just the way you rounded that off, it reminds me of the previous session that kick-started the book group, where Rachel talks about the Kerry Facer book, which I know Steve has read and which I'd recommend. I'll go and fish out the link in a minute. But around future building and directing focus around these wicked problems at making a positive contribution to something in your immediate surroundings. And I think you unpacked beautifully, concisely there, the fact that it's actually doable. It can sound complex, but with a range of strategies, and we've shared the link to Steve's blog there, that to begin to tease out ideas from students, but then to direct them at something quite real and authentic and practical, as you're sharing there with the slide with the letter from the minister. So that's a wonderful story. And there's I'll let you actually look back through some of the comments underneath, Danielle, around really exploring these ideas can feel quite risky and open, but that's also part of the learning and kind of failing forward and being prepared to keep working in this way, as opposed to spoon feeding students, for example, about a particular topic. And really you've shown that you can just get started on this kind of approach, and that it just came from being enthusiastic and open to a new way of exploring something. So thank you very much, and I would urge you, Danielle, to capture some of those ideas and strategies that you've used and to share them in the VLN discussion after today, because I know that there'll be others who would love to hear a little bit more about your story from yourself and Steve. So round of applause, and thank you very much for sharing that today. And what I would like to do is to move swiftly on to Reed, because Danielle teaches year 9, Reed teaches younger students, but there is no reason why we can't approach teaching in this way, regardless of the age of the students. Danielle, it's up to you if you keep your camera on or off. But Reed, I'm just going to cue back to your slide, because we also want to hear about what you've been thinking about with your students who are a little bit younger. So thank you for persisting in the face of technological challenge. So Reed, based at Henderson North School in Auckland, is going to tell us a little bit about the thinking that he's been doing with his school as well. Reed.
Hi, thanks, and nice to be here with everyone. So when I read this book, it was just as the point that we were starting to do our mapping for this term, and we had this. We've got a very multicultural school here. I think I have 15 or 16 different ethnicities just within my classroom. But we have this issue where our children aren't necessarily always very understanding of the differences between them, and so the staff thought a nice way to look at that, explore those differences, would be to look at culture. But when we started talking about this as a staff, a lot of people were talking about sort of looking backwards, and it didn't sound all that exciting to me. I was I was a little bit more interested in looking forward, and I guess the time I was reading key competencies, it resonated with me. I was thinking about what was going on. You know, obviously New Zealand, our population's increasing quite substantially for us as a small country. Our politicians are throwing all sorts of different immigration policies around. There's media, you know, the media's going on about foreign ownership, foreign land ownership. All these things are happening, but then within my own classroom, I've got kids that they don't understand the differences and the similarities between themselves as cultures. So I've got this lovely melting pot, I guess, you know, this awesome opportunity to explore and have a go with this. So we've spent the last 2 weeks of this term really delving into what is the similarities and differences in our cultures, and we got it all going with Paul Henry's wonderful situation he gave us a few years back, where he just got up there and he questioned what actually is a New Zealander. But it's provided, it's been a really awesome starting point for the kids. It's provoked their thinking, and I've got amongst it, and it's been great because they've started asking some really big questions for them as year 5s and 6s, and for me that's been a journey in itself, because some of them they ask easy questions. We need them to, if we're going to move forward as a country, we need all kids asking hard questions and thinking about what they can do, and they have. So that's been a really good thing for me. So we've started with these cartoons and thinking even just about the idea of them exploring visual images and tackling that has been a big thing. The cartoons that are provided around the world as a commentary of the way our world's developing are pretty powerful. And our children aren't going to understand that unless they're given the skills to do it. But it's also, they're a fairly big insight into the history of our world. So there's this whole literacy thing going on there, and so they've explored Paul Henry and the Governor General comments, but it's scaffolded them, I think, into a good place. And at the same time, all that's been going on is I've been able to pull out a whole heap of ideas, really, around their own cultures, and they've started to value their culture a little bit more, but they're starting to value each other's culture. So that whole diversity of others, you know, the relating to others thing is happening organically, and in a genuine way, whereas I think it could happen, I could probably manufacture it, I believe, but it wouldn't be sustainable. So that's been a big thing for me. So moving forward, the challenge I've been giving to my class is that they see that our population's changing. They see that our immigration statistics are changing. So what are we going to look like as a multicultural society in 10, 15, 20 years? Because it's not going to look like what it does now. And I guess our politicians are a bit of an insight into that, you know, the diversity within there. So the children of just a small stepping stone for them is we've talked about reimagining Kiwiana, and so I've got children that are using Indian Rangoli to redesign Kiwiana. Kids have taken a Pacifica Maori lens to the Buzzy Bee, who looks so much cooler with a face of Koru and Tiki. He looks so much. He just looks so much cooler. But that's the scaffolding. We need to start asking some hard questions about it if we're going to move forward as a class. And the kids are doing that. And I've put up there on the slide some of the questions that they've asked, and they are big questions for 9 and 10 and 11-year-olds. You know, this idea that our culture, whatever that culture is, could be taken over by people moving into New Zealand, and whether or not that's a good thing or a bad thing, and how we decipher that, and how we deal with it, how we contribute, participate in that situation, that's a conversation within our classroom that will be so much more meaningful going forward, I think, than looking back and going, well, this is the Queen's birthday weekend, this is why it's celebrated, because that's not going to prepare them for the future. It gives them a little bit of knowledge, but that's it. So that's what's going on for me. I've got all these cool little projects are happening in the classroom where the kids they're needing to find knowledge, so they're using their research skills. They're trying to find experts to help with them with redesigning or recreating our national anthem and trying to give it more of a multicultural feel than what it currently does, given that it was written over 100 years ago. So these are quite exciting things for me, and they're quite big. Going forward, I know I've got some issues with some of my children are really struggling with this as an idea and trying to conceptualize it. But I believe that even just thinking about what we can do for our school, they're going to be able to do something pretty cool. It's an incredibly multicultural school here, in Henderson, and we've got some awesome things that are happening around culture. We've got our Kapahaka group, there is a Samoan dance group, there is a Tongan dance group, but there's all these other things that could be happening. We've got a wonderful little Chinese community, there's a wonderful little Hindi community within the school, and maybe for some of my kids, just pushing that a little bit more so that these things happen, that's them participating and contributing to their community. And I think they're just at a simmering nicely. I think, within a week or two, we might be at a point where the pot's really to bubble over a little bit, and all these ideas are really ready to come out. So I'm quite excited about what they're doing, and yeah, I feel like a bit of a juggler at the moment, trying to manage it all. So yeah, lots going on in my classroom. A lot of it's relying on a just-in-time teaching model, but that's not altogether a bad thing either. So that's what's going on here. But I'll be welcome.
It's
Glad
wonderful
to answer
to
any
hear you
questions.
sharing. And we do have some questions as well, Reid. I'd like to thank you for sharing that little kind of snippet into what you guys are doing there. I'm just going to, just for the last few minutes, invite Danielle and Sam and Rachel just to pop your cameras on. We may hit the end of the internet by doing so, but it'd be nice to have everyone back in the room visibly so, just for the last little bit, because there's some questions coming up. And first of all, I just want to read, there's a question that's come to you from Chris, who is in the room, but I'm sure it's a question that other people would want to ask as well. Is it just you trialing, exploring this approach? How are you, is that innovation something that's spreading across the school? I mean, here we are, Connected Educator Month, and trying to promote those cross connections within school as well as beyond. How is that being managed, Reid?
I'm incredibly lucky where I am in that. Yes. I'm incredibly lucky in that our principal allows us to explore our own passions and interests and different pedagogical approaches. And my interest in this does selfishly, I guess, come from the attitude that when I read books like this and I apply them to what I think would work for me in the classroom, and I hear the ideas coming from some of my other colleagues here at school, I would rather be in my classroom. I don't believe that going through all of the list of our public holidays and understanding what makes those is truly and sustainably going to teach you about relating well to others and celebrating diversity. I may be wrong. I'm willing to be wrong, but what I see in my classroom is it's positive reinforcement for me to keep on doing what I'm doing. But maybe that I've got positive reinforcement as well, and that those differences between the teachers are also supported at my current school. If that's a good answer.
No, that's good, and the support is absolutely vital to help these kind of, you know, to water the new ideas. And I think a real challenge across the system of a school and then the system of multiple schools is actually to take these pockets of innovation and spread them more widely. I just want to ask Sally to just say a few words about a couple of comments that you've been putting in the chat around diversity, because Reid is talking about not just you know, looking at the makeup of your class and trying to make sure that you're addressing the diversity in the class, but educating for diversity. Sally, I wonder if you could just say a little bit about that in Sue's absence, because I know Sue would be interested in this as well.
Yes, well, I guess that's more Sue's area than mine, but I guess I can make a couple of comments. I thought what Danielle was talking about at the start there, when they had all those different perspectives on one issue, I think that's when we're talking about educating for diversity, it's about allowing those different perspectives to come together and using those different perspectives to create something new. So it's that idea as opposed to just acknowledging there's different perspectives in your classroom. It's how can you work with that and hear each other and then do something with that knowledge.
Yes, absolutely. And perhaps another comment, Rachel, would you have something to add about that?
Yeah, I think you know, there's opportunities where we are seeing diversity not as just something to cater to or to celebrate, but actually seeing it as a resource for even, I mean, getting back to the earlier part of the webinar when we were talking about kind of how do we find our way to the really good questions. Sometimes the first thing we need to do is actually create the space that allows the difference in the diversity of experiences and perspectives that exist right there in the room amongst the group of people in the room, and to actually really allow that and allow those ideas to connect and to collide and the people to start to think about not just what they know but what others know and why they might see things differently, and then kind of keep digging away and going from there and finding the way to the questions that ignite people's passion and that they want to keep pursuing them. And I would say, you know, I'd love to come and see what's happening in Reid's class or in Danielle's. I did actually get to see a little bit of what was going on in Danielle and Steve's class. And there's that sort of energy that happens when people are really engaged with what they're doing because they've been able to follow an idea or a question that actually means something to them, that actually matters.
And we'll kind of wrap things to a close in the next couple of minutes. I remember having a colleague a few years ago, culture with a small c, and culture with a capital C, and she said, culture with a capital C is when you have kapa haka and you have posters around the room and you read poetry about different cultures, but the culture with the small c is when you design learning where the pedagogy opens up possibilities for those different perspectives and for students to bring themselves and their prior knowledge to the learning. It may be much less overt, it's much closer to what we're talking about here, that educating through diversity and for diversity, and inviting students to take real action in relation to the world around them now, and to begin to make sense of the world around them as citizens now. So these are huge and complex, and some can feel quite abstract ideas, but I personally think that the book goes a long way to beginning to give teachers something to get hold of, to begin to pursue a reimagined way of learning that puts the student right at the heart, and completely true to the intent of the New Zealand curriculum. What I'm going to do just in the last couple of minutes is just to go around the room. I'd like to just start with Danielle and ask them, if you had one piece of advice, I'll give you a moment to think about this. If you had one piece of advice for an educator watching, and there will be people who come back and watch this as a recording, as has happened all the way through Connected Educator Month. A piece of advice for a teacher who's thinking, I'm just not really sure where to start, but I feel inspired to begin to explore some of the ideas that we've been discussing in the book and in the webinar. Where might I start? And I might come to Danielle first. Piece of advice, educators intrigued and keen to begin to try something with their own students.
I would start with design thinking, without a doubt. The whole framework of it means that you start by really exploring an issue or an idea or a problem in depth. So you're not trying to put your own perspective on the issue, but rather you're trying to really seek out and understand another perspective. And then it takes you through a process of, it's okay that there's a problem, but we can do something about it, and it scaffolds and guides you through that process. And then there's more and more educators that are using this process. So as there are more and more of them using it, there are more and more resources available. And it's a great scaffold that applies in across any learning area, any age group. So that would be my best advice. And I'm just finding a link because somebody just asked for it as well. So I'll find the link and share that with you guys as well.
Where to start, how to begin.
Earlier, Sally and Rachel were talking about we don't need to look at such lofty, huge ideas to be looking at this moving forward. And I think that would be my piece of advice, particularly at the primary level. There's lots of big problems that that our students can be dealing with, which will allow them to be building skills and dealing with all these key competencies that are still manageable conceptually for our students. I, tongue-in-cheek, started exploring the idea of sport within my original blog post about this, and I really think that sport actually, for a lot of children, would be a manageable way into this. There are significant problems within children's sport happening now in our country, which would allow children to explore this idea of wicked problems, and they would have different perspectives. You know, this whole the fuzzy answers situation. Yeah, there's enough wicked problems within schools that children can deal with that we don't need to be making it so
Still keen
big.
to participate in the
That would be my
discussion.
advice.
You know, what's a, do you have a comment or an invitation or a starting point from yourselves? A final comment today? Over to maybe Sally first. Well, that's wonderful. Thank you for that. And a final comment to you, Rachel.
I think mine would be pretty similar to Reed's, really, is to start local and start small and then spread your web wider, because there are so many things in your own setting that you can start to look at. I guess my personal interests are health promotion and promoting the health and the well-being of people or the environment, but those are fantastic places to start, but they also link up to wider societal issues that they can find you a way in.
I was just mulling over the phrase about going forward or moving forward and thinking about how we often say you have to walk before you can run, right? But walking is actually a process of controlled falling forward, and you see that in a toddler or someone who's just beginning to learn how to walk. It's not the tidy, refined process that we recognise in adults, and perhaps if we think about ourselves in that terms, we can see that, I always come back to my same mantra, which is when you don't know where to start, you start somewhere. And I think it's fantastic having things like this book group. So we've now got this recording available for people if they want to start there, to kind of pick up some of the ideas that are in the book and see how they're playing out in practice. We've got the VLN. So there's lots of ways that people can find not just the sort of source ideas, but actually examples of people who are doing things in their classes. And so I'd say, keep looking, find the example that connects for you, or that seems, like a good place for you. And if you want to see how someone else has done it, you can look at what someone else has done. Or if you want to just kind of try something that no one's done, just try it, and find people to talk to about it. So yeah, start anywhere.
And Reed. So I'd like to a virtual paki to all of you for your contributions this afternoon. Thank you so much for your time, and for those of you who've been participating in the room, thank you for your great, rich comments that I know have been swirling through the chat as well. You've added to the depth of the thinking this afternoon. So a great collaborative effort, all of you. There's an evaluation form link that's just working its way up the chat there. If you could take a couple of minutes, your feedback is always welcome as we keep iterating and refining how we do these online sessions. I'd like to just wrap up this afternoon then with our karakia and let you all continue on your way today. But we've got another 5 school days before and after Labour weekend as part of Connected Educators, so do stay with us. Lots of things rolling out next week, and of course the discussion for NZCER that just continues in the VLN for whenever people are ready to jump in. So thank you all. Ka whakaria te tapu ki a watea Aotearoa, ki a tūruki whakataha ai, ki a tūruki whakataha ai, huye tākie. Ka kite anō everyone, and thanks very much again for this afternoon. Take care.